Chapter 2. Sauron loses his first staring contest. A hand was promptly slapped against his mouth to shut him up, but Haldir continued to rattle on uselessly in his shock.
It's the truth. Because we didn't think it would be safe for him to be wandering out in Middle-earth. I told you already. You have to. You already said that you would be the counselor.
Haldir frowned, and Namo finally took his hand away. With one of those sighs that people used when little children didn't understand something that seemed rather plain and obvious, Namo explained,
We wanted somebody who wouldn't fall into any of his little traps. Since you said that you do not care what people said, it was believed that you would be good for the job.
Why does he need counseling in the first place?
Haldir pressed, his apprehension and sudden fear of this new unpleasant situation making him fidget uncomfortably.
He needs counseling because he is evil. Honestly, do you think we are just going to let somebody with bad intentions for the populace of the world sit around here for the rest of eternity?
Namo shook his head.
It would be good to at least try to get him to feel indifference, rather than allowing him free rein with his thoughts, as that would only lead to him going all over creating havoc and pestering all of the people who are plenty disturbed already.
There was silence for a minute, but it was quickly broken by a noise of obvious shock coupled with rage issuing from the cell. Haldir instinctively turned to look at the door and did a double take.
Arrow!
He cried, instantly tripping over a crack in the ground in his reflex to flee, falling hard onto the floor.
Graceful,
Namo commented. He looked at the door with a bored half-interest, but apparently wasn't surprised with what he saw, and merely helped Haldir back up. Haldir did not look away from the door, his eyes wide as he stared at the cell. Now the person who Haldir still couldn't believe to be Sauron was standing against the bars, looking carefully at the people in the hall.
What happened?
He bellowed, obviously furious. He grabbed the bars and shook them as hard as he could before quickly giving up on that and glaring at the two looking back at him. For a moment he scrutinized Haldir, his eyes flashing dangerously in the dark. Haldir was distinctly uncomfortable at this, and was rather grateful that he was a dozen feet away. He didn't feel too much better when Sauron turned his attention away to Namo, as this was instantly followed by another outburst.
Oh, it's the Lord Namo!
Sauron spat, the rage in his voice just barely harnessed.
How could it have taken me so long to realize that it would be you who would welcome me here?
He shook the bars again in a vain attempt to pry them loose, clearly intent on meeting with Namo from a distance closer than the present. Namo looked rather bored with the whole affair, which Haldir noted could possibly be a way with dealing with frustration. It was something he had seen in his groups.
May I remind you that you don't really have a body. Just because you are visible doesn't mean that you actually have a physical form.
Sauron looked at him, an even deeper scowl settling over his features.
I have been disembodied enough to know that.
Yes, I would hope after like 6 times you would have figured that out, but since you don't seem to easily learn things, I wasn't sure.
Sauron glared at Namo silently. Even if his eyes were no longer flaming, they still had a certain light to them, that with the pure animosity of the expression caused a pretty disarming look. Namo, however, held his ground easily, and the two were locked in a very uneventful staring contest. Haldir was beginning to get very bored. Now that his initial surprise and fear had been able to wear off, and as he realized the bars to be quite sturdy, he wasn't all that disturbed anymore. Suddenly, however, Namo turned away and said to Sauron,
You blinked.
Sauron gave a very indignant sigh, and Haldir couldn't help but look at him. His mouth hung open, and his eyes were wide, as though he couldn't believe what Namo had just said.
I never lose,
he murmured, and then sat on the floor, banging his head against the bars.
Well, everything just keeps looking up.
Namo closed his eyes briefly and shook his head, as though he expected what happened next.
My life is ruined.
Sauron moaned.
My slaves, my armies, my kingdoms, all gone. That stupid midget with the foot hair problems destroyed my ring. My cat probably died. And now I'm stuck here of all places. Why couldn't I have just been completely annihilated instead of being sent here? Why is it that I seem destined to always find some way of sinking lower than before? Why?
He smacked his head against the bars to emphasize certain words. Haldir couldn't help but wince.
Because you don't always get everything you want,
Namo said.
Of course I don't.
Sauron ground out through clenched teeth.
I never get what I want.
Well, of course. Most of the things you want are A, really stupid, B, really evil, or C, both of the above.
Looking off vaguely into the tunnels, Sauron sniffed.
It isn't any wonder I didn't stick with you people. Look at how you treat others.
With a rather exasperated sigh, Namo looked at him.
Do you really expect me to treat you well when you have had people eaten alive by wolves? Just to name one of the many monstrosities you found fitting to bestow upon people.
Sauron smirked, looking momentarily pleased.
I had forgotten about that.
Namo shook his head again.
You might have, but Finrod hasn't.